Hello, brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 32 of the Chronological Read Through the Bible. Today we are starting in Exodus chapter 1 and reading through to chapter 4, verse 17. This is a tremendous amount of material. Now, I just want to say that keep in mind that we are picking up at really after the end of Genesis. I know we just had the book of Job sandwiched in between the two. Genesis ended with the Hebrews having left the land of Canaan, 70 in number, joining Joseph and his family who were already in Egypt. And then at the very end of Genesis, Joseph dies and is placed in a casket, or probably a sarcophagus at that time. Now, Joseph, highly respected by the Egyptian people. Pharaoh himself viewed Joseph as a type of a father to him. He refers to Joseph as that. Also, I want you to keep in mind here, this is historical that we know this, that the Egyptians who were ruling at the time of Joseph and the Hebrews coming to Egypt were actually not pure Egyptians. They themselves had been herdsmen. So that's a part of why when they say the Egyptians despise herdsmen or shepherds, it's kind of like they despise us as well, because that's what we were before we became the ruling family here in Egypt. Now, we kind of move forward now to, as Exodus opens up, it tells us that a new Pharaoh came to power who did not know Joseph. Now, again, historically, this is now the transfer of power has happened, and the Egyptian rulers are back in charge of Egypt. So they've overthrown their rulers, and now they are back to their rightful rule from how they would view it. So naturally they come in and they, as we know, the Bible tells us they don't like shepherds. So they don't like the Hebrew people, and they see how numerous they are becoming. And Pharaoh, of course, then makes his edict that all of the male children are to be killed. He's going to sort of use his own little program, his own plan to rid the Jewish people by getting rid of their males, because it'll be okay, as far as he sees, for the girls, the women, to be kept alive, to intermarry and to basically weed out the Hebrew people that way. This, keep in mind, is a plan that Satan has used throughout history, and how God's chosen people, the Hebrew people, oftentimes come under great persecution, and how so many times throughout history the devil has tried to eradicate the Hebrew people. We can think of this, whether it was the Babylonians and trying to eradicate the Hebrew people, whether it was later even King Herod. Remember, King Herod, we're going to see this ways off, but King Herod himself is not Hebrew. He's not a Jewish person. So he, when he is attacking to kill Jesus and is unsuccessful in doing that, but he kills many Jewish baby boys at that time in Bethlehem, a part of the Christmas story, as we know. So now we kind of see the times that we live in, and how children are being eradicated in many ways, and we know that in the end of times there will be two witnesses who will stand before the world. Just an idea, just something for you to think about. But we have the program of Hitler, coming in during the Nazi reign of Germany. So the Hebrew people have become a target unlike any other people group ever in the history of the world. And yet they stand today. They still exist to this day. I just want you to keep that in mind, of God's mighty hand of protection. No other people in this world have ever gone through as much as the Hebrews and yet still remain protected and strong. So the Lord raises up a prophet as a mere baby, and the family says he is different, and some scriptures would say beautiful. So they say they kept this baby because he's beautiful. Now remember, Moses is the one writing this himself, but under God's instruction. And Moses is placed in a basket, or some versions say an ark. That's where there's the old trivia question: how many people were saved in an ark? And the traditional answer is 8, Noah and his family, but you could say 9 if you count baby Moses. So Moses placed in the ark and sent down the river Nile, and it ends up landing at the very spot where Pharaoh's daughter is bathing. Now I want to pause there. This is where I want to give a little more commentary. You kind of would just be left to think that she's bathing there, just taking a bath. I believe this is a ritual bath. I don't think this would have been her everyday bath, just going down to the Nile River. Remember, the Egyptians saw the Nile River as a very spiritual river, a life-giving river, oftentimes associated with Osiris as being seen, the god of the Nile. Sometimes there's many little confusion there with the different gods of the Nile, because you have the hippopotamus is one of the gods of the Nile, the crocodile is one of the gods of the Nile, the frogs are one of the gods of the Nile. We're going to get into that a little later when we are talking about the plagues being poured out upon Egypt. But I believe she had gone down as a part of a ritual bathing, and as she sees this basket and sends her servant to collect it, when she looks inside, I believe she sees this as a gift from one of the Egyptian gods. Now, she clearly knows it's a Hebrew baby because he would have been circumcised, and I want to unpack this a little more later, but Moses was from a Levite family. We know that from the scriptures, and we later in chapter 6 we're told the names of Moses' father and mother. So, being a Levite family, one of the traditions has it is that the reason why the Levites, again, this isn't scriptural, this is just a Hebrew tradition, historical tradition in a sense, that the reason why the Levites were chosen to be the priestly division is because during their time in Egypt, they were the tribe that stood strong and did not worship the Egyptian gods. So that's what Hebrew tradition teaches as to why they were separated. So Moses would have been circumcised. I just bring this up because that was a question in a Bible study which I had not too long ago, and just to clarify that later when Moses' 2 sons are circumcised, it's his sons and not himself. So it's sort of like he was out of bounds at that point. We're going to get there very soon. So now Moses being raised in the courts of Pharaoh as really the heir to the throne, because again in history we know that this Pharaoh had no sons. So I believe that Moses would have gone on to have become Pharaoh. Now some would say, well, why didn't he just wait and be Pharaoh and then set the Hebrews free? Well, what would that freedom have meant? Why would they have gone back to Canaan? They would have had everything in that they would have ever wanted in Egypt. Canaan was going to mean wars having to be fought, which we will see later. The Lord wanted the Hebrew people in that land for a reason, and it's really because that's the crossroads to the world. At that time, every trade good going from Africa up into Asia and Europe all had to pass through that region, or it had to go out to sea. But most of the time it still passed through that region. So it was a way of getting God's word and God's message out to the entire world if the Hebrew people followed God's instructions. So 40 years Moses is in Egypt before he flees after having been found out of having murdered an Egyptian. Now, I believe in Moses' fight to help the Hebrew who is being beat by the Egyptian. I think it's this God ingrained, just, I'm a deliverer. And I don't know that Moses was sitting there, I'm a deliverer, but I think it was this thing of like, I've got to do something. I've got to help my people. But he acted too soon. God has his time. But God used those events to take Moses from having been in the courts to putting him out in the wilderness to learn how to shepherd, to learn how to protect, and to learn the very wilderness that he would end up spending another 40 years in. Well, after 40 years as a shepherd, the Lord appears to Moses in the form of a burning bush and says, Moses, Moses, drawing his attention even more to this wondrous sight. And God speaks to him there. Now, another question comes up as to why was he instructed to remove his sandals by the Lord? And I don't know whether this would be the exact reason, but it was a description that I heard many years ago from a pastor, and I just always found it to be a really just meaty reason to me, and that was that the shoes, the sandals, they were made by man, but the bare foot was made by God, and removed that which was man-made to stand before the Lord in the form that he made. I just thought that's just kind of neat. Maybe I don't know that we could necessarily build a strong foundation on that, but I just look at it from that standpoint. Moses then offers up all these excuses to God. Basically like, I'm not a man of eloquent speech. Well, when you were a baby and your parents were trying to hide you, they had to get rid of you and send you down the Nile, trusting in the Lord because you were crying too much. You were of eloquent speech as a baby, so just trust the Lord. When God calls you to a task, he's going to equip you for that task. God's not going to call you to do something that he has not prepared you for, or that he has not equipped you for. And Moses will learn that. There's a process to come. I think of the story of the wife who gets up early one morning preparing herself for church, and after a while she realizes her husband's still in bed. And she says, aren't you getting ready for church? And he's like, oh, the music's so slow, and the people are cold, and besides, nobody really likes me there. And the wife says, oh, that's not true. She says, I hear you sing to the music, and the people do like you. And then she says, besides, you're the pastor. You see, we can make all kind of excuses. But if you are the chosen, called of God to a task, he'll equip you. He'll give you the patience and the perseverance to make it through. I hope that you're able to take in the full aspects of the book of Exodus, the story which unfolds. It is a great story of redemption. 70 people and Joseph's family enter into a foreign land, and somewhere between 2 and 3 million come out. Also remember that God had told Abraham that his children would be in Egypt for 400 years. And we're about to see them be set free and delivered. All life starts with a birth. But not everybody gets to experience the Exodus, being free from slavery, or as the New Testament would picture it, being free from sin. The Hebrews who would remain in Egypt, they were slaves, and people who remain in the world and separated from the love of Christ are sinners and will die in their sin. But the scriptures tell us in 2 Corinthians chapter 5 verse 17, therefore if anyone is in Christ, behold, he is a new creature or new creation. The old things have passed away, and behold, the new things have come. A promised land lays ahead in the future for the people of Israel who are in Egypt. And so does one for you. Hope you're having a blessed day. Till tomorrow, God bless.